Continuing, introductory stuff for SCI 139, Introduction to Biology, Plants and Animals. We're going to talk about the research papers. I know I'm not going to have to update this because what we do with the research papers isn't going to change no matter how the makeup of the class changes through the semester. I will have sent you a link to a little bit of peanut. To a video about why a college education is supposed to matter, about what message it sends to potential employers that you have a college degree. And one of the things that is kind of up there in importance is that they kind of assume if you've managed to get through that you have some skill in following directions. And it's a science class. Following directions is a really big part of taking a science class. It's important in the labs, and it can be important in the classes. This is gonna annoy the hell out of you, because a lot of doing the research papers correctly is doing the details right, where you're following the directions the way that the directions tell you to work. Believe me, there's a lot of careers you get with a college education where you have to fill out paperwork, and you can't just fill it out. You've got to fill it out exactly the way they want it filled out, or somebody's going to yell at you, or something isn't going to happen that's supposed to happen. It's a really major deal. And so there are directions to follow, and I will warn you about this a couple of times. You can lose points for doing the papers badly, but most people lose points because they didn't follow the directions they were supposed to follow. And that is, I don't quite understand that. You don't need to be a scientist in order to be able to read and follow directions. So the research papers are called that because you're going to do research. You're going to find some stuff out. And it can be relatively simple biology stuff. I want you to show me that you understand it, so I don't want you to pick something that's going to be really tough on you. You're not science majors. I don't expect you to write science majors type papers. I expect you to hit the topic the way that the topic is asking you to hit it. Again, following directions. They're not going to be really long papers. What I do expect is from where you start writing to where you stop writing. Is it for some reason the video just reset again? That there's 4 pages. So I do that. I look at where I'm looking, okay, here's where the text starts, and I flip through, and I flip through, and I flip through. There's a page, there's a page, there's a page. But you're short. You haven't hit the 4th page. That's a short paper. You can go past it. You can give me 5, 6, 7, 8 pages. 4 pages, double spaced with a reasonable margin is not hard to hit. What sometimes happens, though, is you give me 4 pages, but it's pretty obvious that your computer helped you. It's skipping lines between paragraphs. That you got to be careful of, because some word processors do that automatically. But to me, it looks like padding. If you hit exactly 4 pages and you've skipped a line every time you went to a new paragraph, you didn't hit 4 pages. If you told your computer, take my 3.5 pages and make 4 pages out of it, they may pull the margins in. They may expand the font. Those are all pretty obvious padding approaches. And weirdly enough, the deduction for obvious padding is the same deduction you would have had for being short 4 pages. So hit 4 pages. It's not a tremendous amount of writing. And I do expect you to hit at least 4 pages of text. What you've actually, I'm not counting the title, I'm not counting the references, I'm not counting, anything except what you've actually written. If you've got a big old picture in the middle of a page, then, and it's half a page, then your text should go, a half a page past that spot. You need to find references, reliable references, proper references, references with some meat in them. So you can use a dictionary to give me a definition, and it should be on your reference list, but that isn't really, copying a definition out of a dictionary is not really getting much meat. So then you need 4 other proper references. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But they can be references using the library's databases. There's a lot of information in the library's databases. They can be information off of the internet, provided your sources are reliable sources. We'll talk a little bit about that. They can be other sources if if you actually contact people, which I've had folks do doing these papers. You know, there are ways to do other references, and there are directions to follow to list them at the end of the paper. If you get anything weird, contact me, I'll tell you how to list it. Otherwise, the listing format's pretty easy. Pretty quickly coming up, I'm expecting to get your first proposal. What is it? You got a list of topics you can choose from. Usually the easiest way into this is to go, okay, it's plants and animals, not people. People don't count. Plants and animals. What am I interested in that has something to do with plants and animals? Okay, I like grizzly bears. Then you start looking at the topics and go, okay, which one of these topics will work for grizzly bears? And your proposal is going to go, I picked this topic, I'm going to write about grizzly bears, and I've gone to the trouble of trying to find information already. Here's a couple of references I've already found. They don't have to be written out quite as weirdly as you have to on the paper itself, but it should be pretty obvious you've got something specific. Like if you went, I'm going to do a paper on research on grizzly bears. Here's a lab in Montana. I've got a lab in Montana for this university that does research. I'm going to use them as a reference. And the Washington Zoo has information about grizzly bears. And then you'd send that in your proposal. And when you got the proposal back, it would go, okay, this looks good. The zoo is unlikely to actually tell you much about the research that you need to be talking about in this topic. That's the purpose of the proposal. It's for me to come back to you and go, this looks great. Or this looks great, remember to do this. Or this looks great, and already I'm not too sure that you're using a reference that tells me you know exactly how you're supposed to be writing this paper. So the proposals are not for me, they're for you. They're for me to kind of steer you if really early on it looks like you're headed in the wrong direction. A lot of times you get a proposal back and they'll go, this sounds really interesting. I don't think you can get 4 pages of information out of this, which is my way of saying start early because you may need to switch, and you don't want to be trying to switch the day before the paper's due. You want to switch earlier, in which case you need to let me know, okay, I want to switch to this. You don't need to write up a whole proposal, but let me know so I can give you some feedback on your new switch. So, and of course, all this information is right there on the webpage. It's right there in the handouts that you're going to get. Once the paper's due, if you never gave me a proposal, the proposal's useless, right? The proposal was to help you steer in the right direction. And if the paper's already due, then I've had people hand in their late proposal with the paper. Like, what good is that? So it doesn't count, except you can give it to me like the weekend before the paper's due, and then maybe you'll get my response back going, oh, this is a really big mistake, which would have been nicer to have a month earlier. But once the paper's due, the proposals are not worth anything. Like a lot of biologists, I am a very visual person. We'll talk about that in the first lab. Like a lot of visual people, I'm a good speller because I see what the words in my head, I see what the words are supposed to look like. That makes me a pain in the butt correcting papers. I'm expecting you to be able to proofread. Now, it's a science class. Why does that matter? Again, going back to the having a college education, I know not everybody is a visual thinker. I know not everybody is a great speller, but at this point in your life, you should know that about yourself. And there are times when you need to be able to do it right, and you need to have a way to do it right. You can't always just depend on your computer to catch the mistakes. So you've got a month to do this. I don't correct spelling and grammar on lab reports. I don't correct spelling and grammar. Hell, I don't even do it on the proposals. I may mark something, but I won't mark off for it. I don't do it on the exams as long as I know what word you're trying to write. But for something where you've got some preparation time, like later on when you're writing a resume or writing a cover letter, you need to get that stuff right because you never know where we are, where us visual thinkers are. We're not all biologists. And there's a lot of people who's going to be looking at your resume, and when they see the 3rd spelling error, they're chucking it. Because to them, that means you haven't, you can't be trusted to put in the work that needs to be done to get something right. So yeah, proofreading is a really big deal. Now, people ask me, can I do extra credit? Here's my extra credit. Make sure it's right before you actually give it to me on a due date. You can send me a paper early, and even bring it into the lab, and I'll sit down with you and go through it and go fix this, fix this, fix this, fix this. I'll do that as many times before the thing is actually due as we can work out. Don't give it to me the day before, but So your extra credit is you have to do it early. Your extra credit is you have to sit in the lab and finish the lab and come up to me and go, is this right? Before you actually leave. It'll be due the next time we're in lab, but by then, you'll hand me in something and it'll either be right or wrong, probably. So you can even, over the course of those 2 days that an exam is out, if I get an email going, I'm not sure I understand this question, could you, I will try to explain a question better if I can. I'll give you feedback there. I won't give you the answer, but I'll kind of, it's pretty obvious you're misreading the question or going in the wrong direction, I'll tell you that. So that's my extra credit. I don't let you do actually extra material, but if you do it ahead of time and make sure that it's right, you'll get lots and lots of extra points. If you do run into problems writing stuff, keep me in the loop. Is that if we hit the due date and you aren't ready, but I know you've been working because you've been asking me questions about sources and stuff as we went along, then I'm much more likely with not worrying about giving a lateness deduction. Whereas if I haven't heard from you at all, and then the day it's due, you've got these wonderful excuses that I've never heard before, I'm kind of figuring you started writing this thing like the day before, and you just aren't getting it done in time. So I'm not as likely to give you, a free pass with no lateness deduction. When you write the paper, if you want to do a title page and be really fancy, that's fine. If you want to put the title on the page and start in the bottom half, that's fine too. I expect the title to make some sense, not just to be a copy of the topic. I do expect the topic number to be on there so that I've got a preview in my head of, okay, what's this supposed to be? Because I won't remember from your proposal. And that's part of following directions. And then you write the text, double space, reasonable margins. If you can't get your word processor to not skip lines between paragraphs, then write it longer than 4 pages. It's in the settings, but Word does that a lot. One big deal, one mistake people make that I don't know you may have run into and may have not run into in English classes I hate this. I'm reading, and then suddenly I'm in the middle of a quote. Who the hell's talking? Same thing's on TV, right? Or I'm watching the news, and suddenly there's a person on the screen. This happened just yesterday. I forget what we were watching, but this person pops up talking, and my wife goes, "Who is this?" And I go, "I don't know. There's nothing on the bottom of the screen. They haven't introduced them." They stuck it at the end. Not a great way, but at least they told us who the person was. That's called attribution. Who is this person and why am I listening to them? Because they gave the name and they told who it was. That should be true for every time you give me a quote. Leading into it, tell me who's talking and why you think it's worth quoting them. A footnote is not enough on something like that. You need to attribute it because that's the way the reading goes. I want to know while this person's talking who I'm listening to. Anytime you do quote somebody, it needs to be footnoted, but the footnote format is different than what you're used to. I'll get to that in a second. Anytime there are numbers, gotta have a footnote on it. Those are the only times I will deduct for no footnote. Why? Well, a quote, you had to have copied from somewhere. Numbers, you had to have copied from somewhere. So you've got a source for that. I want to know what it was. Theoretically, if you give me specific descriptions of things, even though you didn't quote it, that should be footnoted also, but I won't make deductions. I'll put a little note saying that should have been footnoted, but I won't make a deduction. We don't do footnotes. I know it's crazy. Everybody calls them footnotes, but technically they are not footnotes in science. They are what's called embedded notes. If you've done an English class where you hit the end of your quote and you put a little number, and then down at the bottom you've got where the quote came from. That's a footnote. Science people don't do that. where you would put the little number, we put parentheses, and the parentheses don't refer to the bottom of the page. They refer to the end of the paper where your list of references are. Well, how do I find it? In the parentheses is the name that your reference list has on it. Your reference list is alphabetical by either authors or organizations, right? Whoever's responsible for the information. So I'm reading a quote, you know, so-and-so said this, so-and-so of this university said this, and then you've got a footnote. And maybe the footnote is that person's name, and maybe you got a quote from that person from somewhere else. But, so I look in the parentheses and it says, you know, Mattson. Okay, go to your reference list, go down to the M's, there ought to be a reference of somebody whose last name is Mattson. It could say Montana Wildlife Institute, in quotes. I'm gonna go to your reference list, go down to W, there should be wildlife, whatever I just said, and then it tells me what that reference is. And that's it, is that a footnote just needs to link to the reference list with a last name. You don't need anything more than that unless you use the same person more than once, with the organization name, so I can find it. And I can find it because your reference list is alphabetized. So, and when you're confused by this, come back and right here it tells you how to do the footnotes. References, we don't use MLA or ALA format. We don't use what you would do in your English or your history class. We use a format. There is no standard science format, but they all do the same basic thing. Who wrote it? How old is it? What was it? And where'd you find it? And that's basically the format here for whatever it is that you're referring to. Who did it? There's your person or all of the people. Sometimes with science references, there's lots of people to list. Last name first. How old is it? Well, it's science. New stuff is, you know, more current than old stuff. So we want the year of whatever the reference is. We don't care about the month. We want the year. You know, we're not that nuts. We want the year. You know, because something from 2019 is, you know, we know is going to be more current than something from 1994. Then what was it? Well, if it's an article, the article's got a name. If it's a web page, the web page has got a name. And if you used a website for an organization, the organization would be there as the author. The particular page from the website would be the name of the web page. And then where'd you find it? If it's an article, it came out of some sort of paper source. Even though it's on the library's databases, they tell you the magazine or journal it came out of. If it's off of the web, any web page is part of a bigger website. Is a page on my site is part of profmcdarby.com. It used to be part of fmcc.edu before they dumped their server. And I had to find another place to live. If it's, you know, a page about grizzly bears, maybe it's on that wildlife thing. And so a lot of times the organization and the support site will have the same name. That's not at all unusual. And then more detail. If it was a paper article, even if it was off of a database, you've got the name of this journal or a magazine or newspaper, whatever it was, and then volumes and issue numbers for magazines and journals, dates for newspapers. If it was a web page, I want to know the address of a web page. I want to be able to track back the information if I need to. Sometimes people will tell me something in a paper, and I'll read and go, well, that isn't right. And so I look at the reference for that information. And I'll go and look to see if your reference was wrong or you got it wrong. And most of the time you got it wrong, but sometimes the references are wrong. Is that I've had to actually contact people on the internet and go, you know, this page is really not, that's not really the way this works. And a lot of times they correct it. But that's the whole purpose of the reference format. Who did it? How old is it? What was it? And where'd you find it? Just in that order with details as to how I can find it afterward. And again, if you're using, like, you're directly contacting people, there are ways to list that on a reference format. Okay, way down here is the topics. I'm going to put the topics on another video because this is running a little long.